Have you ever wondered what it would be like to shoot something cool with a camera that is at least 12 years old, and whether that would stand side by side with the latest cameras of the day? Well, that's the challenge I've set myself on, and I'll be using a very basic Canon IXUS 220HS. Believe it or not, this camera is 12 years old. It's tiny. It's got a 20 to 120 lens, and believe it or not, records full HD 1080p. So I'd be curious to find out how good image you can get out of this camera. In this day and age, when all the camera manufacturers are releasing the latest and fanciest cameras over the last couple of months, I've been wondering what it would be like to shoot with a camera that is at least 11 or 12 years old, as basic as you can get, and whether the footage coming out of that camera would actually sit side by side with these cameras, or whether it would be blown out of the water. You would think that it would be no comparison. But you know, let's see what we can get out of this camera. I'll be using a Canon IXUS 220HS, as basic as it can get. Tiny, fits in the palm of your hand. It has a built-in 20 to 120 lens. There is no exposure control. It's so basic, it's almost scary. Battery life lasts about 20 to 25 minutes depending on usage. But you look, it outputs a 1080p signal. So I'll be curious to find out whether you can actually get some nice cinematic footage out of it. So this is the challenge. Let's see how we get on. It certainly is liberating to be filming with a camera that is so tiny that fits in the palm of your hand. Yes, there is no comparison to shooting with a camera with interchangeable lenses, but the whole purpose of this challenge was to demonstrate that you could actually shoot pretty decent images with a camera that is over 12 years old and is as basic as you can get. Let me give you a couple of facts. Over 70% of people, that's a whopping 70%, watch YouTube content on their mobile devices, that being their mobile phone, and with an average screen size of 5.5 to 6.5 inches. You should ask yourself, how many people will actually be able to tell the difference between 4K and 1080p in such a small screen size? Well, most people probably won't. In addition to this, still in 2020, YouTube's preferred or recommended upload resolution is still 1080p. But YouTube probably know one or two things about the most popular resolution that people watch their content on. These should give you some food for thought. So as you can see, that's actually not bad at all, you know, taking in consideration that you're dealing with a camera that is 11 to 12 years old, has no exposure control. I mean, the challenge with this camera is that you cannot pan, you cannot tilt. You have to choose your frame, and that's it. Because the moment you make any movement, exposure is gonna change, and the whole thing is gonna look a mess. But still, if you're clever and you know what you're doing and you're creative enough, you can get some really decent images. Now, one thing is outdoors, there is plenty of light. Another thing is indoors. And this is where the difference is. I would suggest, if you are on a tight budget, that you invest more money in anything but the camera. The Canon C70 will set you back $5,500. The Canon R5 will set you back 3,900. The R6 about $2,500, and the new Sony a7S III will set you back anywhere around 3,500. And that's just the camera body, okay? Nothing fancy. On top of that, you need to add batteries, tripod, lenses. Lenses will easily cost just as much, if not double, the cost of the body. Memory cards, potentially a new laptop, microphones, fluffies, accessories, cables. I mean, the list go on. You could literally spend anywhere between $6,000 to $10,000 for a camera that originally cost $2,500. Get yourself a cheap camera. You don't need to have anything fancy. You need to make sure that it has a decent autofocus. That's the main thing. Okay, the rest, make sure that you invest in lights and good microphone. Sound is extremely important. Get a decent tripod, and things that you're actually going to see in front of the camera, not so much behind the camera. You'll have time to invest in a fancy camera, because a fancy camera requires sometimes having not just you but another person to help you, and it's a whole range of issues. Let's see how this camera performs indoors. Now, first thing I'm going to show you is what a normal person would do if, let's say, I say, let's shoot someone cooking something in a kitchen. And you just take this camera and you don't have any tripod or any lights or anything. And this is what a normal person would probably do. Okay. Now, we can all agree that that doesn't look particularly great. Framing was a little bit all over the place, but this camera needs light. It doesn't have low light capabilities in the slightest. So let's see what this camera would perform if you have some basic lighting and a little bit of stability in the way of a tripod. We're not going any fancy. This is basic. I would almost say it's back to basics. You don't need a fancy kitchen, you don't need a fancy setup. You just need a little bit of creativity and goodwill. And let's see what we can get. So as you can see, you don't really need much to have a decent amount of footage. A couple of lights, as you can see here behind me. So for our filming, we have a lovely Canon camera, and if I come away a little bit, as you can see, we have a sound recorder and a little onboard monitor, which I haven't actually used very much. Our cooker, and we move up a little bit, we go one light and another light and a tripod, a very basic DSLR tripod. Now, shooting with this camera is not going to win you or me any awards, but the purpose of this challenge was to illustrate the fact that you can get some decent images with a camera that is extremely basic and is at least 11 or 12 years old, and really is as basic as it can get. The question you need to ask yourself is, do you need the new fancy camera or do you want the new fancy camera? Because there is quite a big difference between needing something and wanting something. Now, if you do any commercial work, any of those cameras or even higher end cameras make perfect sense. If you deal with clients that require that kind of quality and demand those formats, then it makes perfect sense. But if you're a small YouTube channel or starting on YouTube or wondering whether you should upgrade to those higher end cameras but you don't have the money for it, or you'd be asking for the money, or God knows what, you might want to spend something that is a little bit lower end and it still gives you just as good features, or just rent it in for the odd chance or the odd job that you might need it. Now, if you are set on spending money on a new camera setup, the most important thing you should spend money on is lenses, not so much the camera body. I mean, you could literally make the most basic DSLR camera look incredible if you have a really nice set of lenses. Personally, when I shoot my stuff, I have the 3 sets of lenses that do all my jobs. I've got the Canon L series 16-35 that I'm shooting this video with. I've got the 24-70 and I've got the 70-200 with the corresponding lens hoods. Yes, you can do matte boxes and all sorts, but these are the 3 lenses that I take. I have a 70-300 as well, but these lenses, as well as the 16-35, will set you back twice as much of any of these cameras that we just mentioned. So these are the tools that are gonna get you incredible images, not so much the fancy camera. A fancy camera with, you know, average glass is gonna make it look average. And if you wanna understand what it's like to shoot with an older camera, this whole video has been shot with a Canon 5D Mark II, which is 10 to 11 years old, and with no magic lantern of any kind, just normal Canon software, and I'm upraising it to 4K. And I'm not saying don't upgrade, because it makes perfect sense, but have some faith on all the equipment. It's not that bad, and it's gonna probably save you some money, and it's gonna probably put a smile on your face and someone else in your family. Anyway, I hope you find this video useful. Subscribe to the channel and help us grow. Thumbs up to the video if you like it, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.